I'm Piyush. I'm a strategy consultant at GMATWiz. I have about 9 years of mentoring experience. I've helped students prepare for various entrance tests. I have helped students get into all kind of schools that you can think of in India, abroad as well. And I have scored a 740 on GMAT in my very first attempt with a Q50 and verbal 41. So in this webinar today, we are going to cover 5 important mistakes that people do, or let me call them also, we can call also them as also as myths. These are certain assumptions that people have in their mind which are not right, and actually end up costing these students a lot. First is, most people think that accuracy is all that matters on the GMAT. Like, that is the most important thing that one needs to focus on. That's one very, very wrong thought process which is there in many students' mind. The second mistake that a lot of people do is they start focusing on learning shortcuts to save time. They think about how to actually solve the questions too quickly, and that's their entire attention and focus, basically. And that's when things go in the wrong direction many a time. So you have to understand why shortcuts don't work, and what you should do in order to improve your scores. Then we'll also talk about another key mistake that people do is they think that, okay, practice makes a man perfect. So it's all about practice, practice, practice. The more I practice, the better I get. But we'll talk about what is actually the right thing to do in order to become perfect or have a good score on GMAT. Another mistake that people do is they think that they should prepare SCCR and RC parallelly, or like multiple things at the same time. Another mistake is they think that it's okay to skip some topics. And as I said, I'll be opening it up for an open-ended Q&A in the end. I'll be quickly going through this 5 important pointers today, and then we will move to that part. Now, those of you who don't know about GMATWiz, a quick intro about us. GMATWiz is one of the most personalized or truly personalized artificial intelligence driven course out there. We help students prepare in a very, very advanced manner, where every student who learns from our platform gets a personalized study plan, which is curated for him by the AI. And the study plans, the best part about the study plan and the course itself is that the course is a very adaptive course. So you will get real-time improvement modules based on how are you performing in the course automatically. And if you take the entire package, which is the Quant Plus Verbal package from our side, you also get access to dedicated mentors who will be assigned to you, with whom you can speak every 15 to 20 days and understand how are you progressing and what needs to be changed in order to improve your score further. And that's one of the biggest reasons we are right now GMAT Club's most effective course when it comes to average score improvement. This data is slightly dated. It says October 2nd, but even today, our average score improvement stands at 100 plus points. It's somewhere around 106 points overall and 117 points for international students. And that goes for the kind of quality offering that we are providing today. Okay, so this is a short brief about GMATWiz. Let's come down to the first mistake that people have, the first myth. Let's burst this myth. Many people think that accuracy is all that matters. And let me put a question to you guys. Again, this is very common thought that I hear from many students, that they say that, okay, when I'm solving OG questions, I'm getting an 80% accuracy there or 90% accuracy there. But when it comes to taking the GMAT or taking a mock test, my scores dwindle significantly. How many of you have heard people asking this question or have faced this yourself as a student? There's a quick yes, no for you guys in the poll section. You can go about that and share your thoughts with me. How many of you have heard this or have felt this yourself as a student? That in the OG you are solving the questions, you get a 80% correct, 80% or more correct. But when you are taking the mocks and all, your score is pretty low. Okay, I see a good number of responses already. Good. So let me now end the poll. I see a significant number of responses. So yeah, 86% of you have heard this from other people or have experienced this yourself. Now, this is a very, very common issue, because as students, again, I'm not saying that this is a problem with us. It's more about the way we have been brought up. Like, generally we see that, okay, the better, the more higher accuracy you have, the better your score is. But trust me, GMAT as a test is a very, very different test. GMAT is not like other standardized tests where you can just pick and choose the questions that you can answer and have a high accuracy and then get a better score. Not really. In GMAT, you don't have the luxury to choose the questions that are served to you. You do not have that luxury with you. You have to answer each and every question which is served to you in order to proceed further. Now, what that means is that accuracy is not the only thing that one should look at. It is very important to understand the adaptiveness of the algorithm, how the algorithm really works. And what it means is that if you do not perform as well towards the beginning of the test, even if you do well towards the end, which actually increases your accuracy level, that does not mean that you will end up getting a good score. Now, I don't want to just continue saying this. I would show you some data points to help you understand visually what I mean to say altogether. Okay, so look at this ESR in front of you. This is again a enhanced score report from from the official GMAT which I took. So this is my personal score report which I'm showing you. What you can see is I scored a 41 in verbal, which is visible on your screen. But what I want you to focus on is the number of mistakes that I made. So in the first quarter, I made a couple of mistakes. In the second quarter also, I made a couple of mistakes. In the last quarter, on the other hand, I made 3 mistakes altogether. So 7 mistakes is what I made in the entire verbal section over here. And I got a score of verbal 41. Okay, so this is just to show you the score that I had received in this particular scenario. Now, this verbal 41 is basically equivalent to 93 percentile. So let's now take up another ESR on the right hand side. So this is the first ESR on the left. This is my ESR, which I showed you earlier, where I made 7 mistakes and I got a score of 41 in verbal. Okay, now I'm actually showing you another ESR report on the right side, where you have a total of 5 mistakes, 3 mistakes in the first quarter, 1 in the second quarter, and 1 in the last quarter. And I want you guys to take a moment. So total of, if you look at the total number of mistakes, there were 5 mistakes made by the student. I want you guys to think about this in a minute. Give it a minute if you want to, and tell me, or guess rather, what could be the verbal score of this particular student on the right side that you see. I'm giving you a minute to think. Please post your responses in the chat. I'm not creating a poll because I would like to see what you guys are predicting over here. So let's see. What do you think is the verbal score of this guy? Again, the 7 mistakes, with 7 mistakes, I got a verbal 41. The student has made 5 mistakes only, 2 mistakes less than me. What do you think is the verbal score of this student? Okay, I have a good number of responses. Pratik says it's 41, Ankit says it's 40, Atul says 35, Sufi says 38. Okay, surprisingly, no one is saying it is should be more than 41. Okay, Utka says should be 38 to 40. Why are you not saying it's more than 41? Guys, this student has made 2 mistakes less than me actually. If you look at it, I made 7 mistakes, I got a 41. The student has made 5 mistakes only. Why are you guys only saying that the student will get a 40, 38, 39? No one is saying 42, 43. Don't you think the student's score should be higher than 41? Like with lesser mistakes? What do you think, guys? Okay. Shisa says 50. Okay. 50 is a very high score to achieve, to be very honest, on verbal, actually. Okay, because initial questions will give you, initial mistakes will give you more easier questions. Okay, depends on the mistake made in the quadrant. The difficulty level will decrease, Nitin says. Okay, great, guys. I'm so happy to see you're able to think in the right direction. And this is something which I want you to understand properly. See, if I show you the actual score of the student, the student scored only 34 in the verbal section, only 34. Can you imagine that? Like for five mistakes and just a score of 34, and the difference in percentile is also significant. You look at 93 percentile versus 71 percentile. That's a huge difference. Now, this is something which people don't understand in the very beginning, and they think that, okay, it's just about completing the test. I trust me, guys. Again, I'm saying this because I hear the question every single day. This is one thing which I hear from students every single day. Even yesterday, I spoke to like 6 people, and about 2 of them said that they were retakers again, and they said that in my last attempt, I could not complete my verbal section. I just had 7 minutes for last 7 questions. Another student had about 12 minutes for 10 questions. And they were saying, had I had more time for just completing the test, I would have done better. So that's something which is a very big misconception in people's mind. And I'm talking about people who ended up scoring 20 in 20s in verbal. Now, generally, if that is the scenario, that basically means you're doing well, like you're not doing well in the beginning of the test. You look at the student, even with 100% accuracy towards in the last quarter and 86% accuracy in the second and the third quarter, you still see a 34. Now, why does this happen? Again, a lot of you have talked about it, but let's see this using a chart. So if you look at this chart over here, and again, this is something which I actually discussed with this particular student and confirmed that in the very beginning, the 3 mistakes that she made most likely were in the very beginning itself, because she was not feeling very confident about the first 3 questions. She probably moved through it faster or whatever, but she was not confident about the first 3 that she answered. And if you look at the difficulty level of the first 3 questions, it's very much close to the medium difficulty, which is where your test starts with. So now, since she got those 3 questions wrong, what really happened was GMAT thought that she does not have the capability of getting the medium questions correct. And that's when GMAT started giving her very easy questions. Because again, this is something which I've actually learned from my extensive research on ESRs. ESRs in a way is my specialty, but from my extensive research, what I've understood is that GMAT algorithm is adaptive, but it is a lot more left skewed than right skewed. Okay, again, I'm just drawing a left skewed curve for you guys to understand what I'm trying to probably mean through a diagram. But what I mean to say here is that it basically shows us very clearly that the algorithm adapts much more from the first to the second quarter, and even within the first quarter, it adapts a lot. Okay, so I have a question from Anubhav. Anubhav says, I attended a webinar of Veritas and they say it's a myth that the first 10 questions are most important. Anubhav, I strongly disagree with that. And I know nothing against Veritas. Data is in front of us, guys. Okay, and I can show you thousands of ESRs where this has happened all the time. Okay, first 10 questions are definitely very, very important. Should I say the most important? Probably not. Or in a way, I can still say it. Because see, if you don't do well on the first 10 questions, you do not get higher difficulty level of questions in the second or the third quarter. The only reason I said that I won't say that first 10 questions are most important is because your actual scoring happens in the second and actually the third quarter, because that's where you start getting the most difficult questions. So in a way, I can say that the third quarter is the most important because that's where you get the most difficult questions. But that's only true if you do a good performance in the first quarter. Okay, so that's how I'll put it. Again, this is a little dense to understand, but I guess you guys are understanding this well. Okay. Yes, so Amna has very rightly put it, that is it like setting the ground for our assessment? Yes, it is like setting a ground for an assessment. You are telling the GMAT algorithm that, see, this is my level, okay? You need to test me at this skill level, not at the lower skill level. So your real result is based on your performance in the third quarter maybe, but like how you set that ground, probably that's the right way to put it, Amna. Thank you so much for that, is to understand that you have to set the ground for the test through the first and the second quarter. So it's very, very important that you guys understand that. And see, guys, I don't mean to say that you need to focus a little more time on the first quarter and that's going to help you get a better score. No, that's not how it is. You cannot get a question right by just giving more time to it. That's another misconception which people have. All I'm trying to say here is that accuracy is not what determines your success. This student was accurate with easier questions, but she was not able to get the harder questions right consistently. And you can see the difficulty level of the questions which I got in the second quarter and the questions that she got right in the second quarter. Again, very similar accuracies, but the difficulty level is significantly different. I was able to get much more difficult questions right, and that's why the GMAT algorithm taught me as a much more capable student. And even in the third quarter, if you see, the question difficulty level which I got correct is significantly more than the other student. Okay, Abhi, again, that's the same point which I talked about. I'm not saying that, and I never say that just giving extra time is gonna get you the question right. If you don't know how to get the question right, you will not get it right even if you spend more time on it. That's something which I have seen with many ESRs also. Consistently, people who get questions wrong end up spending more time on them. So it's not like you're spending more time and still you can get it right. If you have the right skill set, you don't need to spend extra time. You need to spend optimal time. One mistake that people do is they start skipping questions in the beginning. They start jumping to the questions later on because they think that they have to save time for the last 2 questions. Okay. Another question from Anurag. Not another question, one question from Anurag. How much questions minimum we should attend to make sure we cross 700 plus? So again, Anurag, that's another myth. And then I'm going to talk about that. So it's not about the number of questions. It's about how or what you do with those questions. Trust me, in my first part of the prep, I solved at least 2000 plus questions for verbal, and I was still struggling with verbal big time around. The next half of my prep, I did not even solve. I guess I solved only 700 to 800 questions. And I was able to improve to a 41 in verbal. Okay. And after the first try of those 2000 plus questions, I was at about less than, like, my scores were always fluctuating between 25 to 70. Mostly it was less than 50%. Okay. So that's the difference that you can see. So it's not about the number of questions anytime. Okay. So Ankit, if you do the first quarter well, the difficulty level will go up in the second quarter more significantly, and then in the third quarter also. Okay, so I got your question wrong, Anurag. I thought you were talking about practice. You are saying in the exam. So basically, in terms of simplicity, if I have to put it across, the first 3 quarters matter a lot. The first 3 quarters matter a lot. Okay, you have to get a very high accuracy in the first 3 quarters, and the mistake should not happen at the beginning of the first quarter, basically. Okay, so that's one thing which I wanted to talk about. So skill is something which matters more than accuracy. You should think about skill, not accuracy. It is not important to get questions right. This is also important which questions are you getting right. So you should show GMAT that I have the skill to get the ability to get question of any difficulty level correct. You should not get stumped by hard questions. You should not get stumped by them. You should be able to show that capability to GMAT. Now, what does a score of 550 to 650 basically signify? What it signifies is that if you are in the score range, what it means is you are getting the easy questions right mostly. Like there's a almost 100% accuracy that you have over there. But the moment you get medium questions, your accuracy start dwindling. It's generally between 60 to 70% only. And because of which you do not have that consistency. And given an adaptive algorithm, you may end up doing poorly in the first quarter, the second quarter, which will impact your score. So what happens because of this is you don't end up receiving a lot of hard questions. And even if you receive some hard questions, your accuracy is very poor over there. So people who are in the score bracket, they generally struggle with application. They know the concepts because their conceptual knowledge is what is helping them get the easy questions right correctly. Okay, and to an extent it is also helping in the medium questions, but it's the application which is not letting them get a consistent score in those medium questions. So it's a mix of like concept plus application, but more about application in my opinion. Okay, Anubhav has another question. He says, does it mean that if we solve tough questions correctly as compared to easy ones, our score will depend on how we answer the tough questions? So Anubhav, again, if you don't answer the easy ones, you won't get to the tough questions. So that's a myth. Basically, what I mean to say is, let me actually go to the next slide. That will actually make it much more clearer for you, Anubhav. So in order to score a 700 plus, what you need to do is you need to get almost nearly 90 to 100% accuracy in easy and medium questions. There's no scope for error in these questions, because if you get a 90 to 100% accuracy in easy and medium questions, these are the questions that are going to appear in the first quarter mostly, right? So if you have a high accuracy over there, the algorithm will then serve you hard questions, okay? Medium, hard, slightly like that. So basically the first 10, 12 questions will be around this difficulty in this range, easy and medium. A good accuracy will make the algorithm serve a good number of hard questions to you. Now, how accurate are you with the hard questions will determine what is your exact score. So for example, if you just want to cross the 700 number or just want to touch that 700 number, it is even possible to touch it with 50 to 60% accuracy in hard questions. Even 50% accuracy in hard questions will take you to 700 level. Okay. Now, if you want to achieve a 720 on the other hand, let's put it this way. If you want to achieve a 720 on the other hand, you need to have around 60 to 70% accuracy in hard questions. And If you want to achieve something like a 740, on the other hand, your accuracy in hard questions should be somewhere between 70 to 80%. Okay, this is how you should look at it. So it's not like you can get a hard question right and the easy question wrong, because if you get the easy questions wrong, you will not get the hard questions at all. So this is what a 700 plus score signifies. So in simple terms, in order to score a 700 plus, the first thing that you need to do is you need to make the algorithm serve you hard questions. Okay, you need to make the algorithm serve you hard questions, and that's only possible with a good accuracy on easy and medium questions. All, as I said earlier, about 90 to 100% if possible. Okay. The second thing after that you have to do is, now this will only help you get hard questions. Now, the next thing that you have to do is you have to get the hard questions right as well. If you do not get them right, then the algorithm will again start serving you easier questions. So how to get the hard questions right? You have to learn the right skills. You have to understand what are the right skills required in order to get the hard questions right. And you have to learn how to apply those skills also. Okay, which brings us to the next point. What are the right skills? Again, one of the biggest mistake I did in my prep, and for verbal primarily. In quant still did not struggle as much, but in verbal the biggest mistake I did was I started learning shortcuts to take time. And this is something which most people do. When I say most, more than 90% people, more than 90%, trust me my friends, more than 90% people end up learning shortcuts to save time. Just to give you some examples of popular shortcuts which I learned, which is very popular in the industry, and I'm telling you guys very honestly, please be aware of these. Even some of the most topmost courses or topmost coaching institutes teach this prevalently. And the only reason why these shortcuts are popular is because teachers will show you a few questions where they will apply these shortcuts and help you solve a question within 1 minute, 1.5 minutes. You will be mesmerized that, okay, this approach is amazing. You'll get awestruck. You think that, okay, I can apply this on every question. You start putting and investing all your effort on that approach. But that's not really an approach. It's a shortcut, which as a student, you'll not be able to apply on all questions. And I'm saying this because I have been a victim of this. And as a teacher also, there were times in quant, I taught people using shortcuts. And I realized that shortcuts do not work for everyone. It only works for people who are already good at it. And if you're already good at it, then you probably don't need shortcuts. So don't fall victim to this shortcuts. One of the most popular one is splits in sentence correction. There are some of the best institutes, I should not say the best, but there are many renowned institutes which use only and only splits approach. They will ask you to just read the option choices quickly, see the points of difference, and then only read the sentence. Trust me guys, never works. Never works on GMAT. It is very, very important. Remember, splits is what I also learned in the beginning of my prep. What splits say is that you only think about the difference in the option choices and think about the grammar terms around it, grammar rules around it, and apply them. Another approach which I learned as a student myself was skimming in reading comprehension. No one taught me how to read a passage. For me, getting a question correct within 2 minutes on RC was a difficult task, because what I used to think was there is a question that I need to answer, and then there is a passage which I need to read. So obviously it is very difficult for me to do that, both of those things in 2 minutes per question on an average, which is very, very tough. So the only thought in my mind was to save as much time as possible in reading the passage. And I used to skim through the passages very, very quickly. Another important mistake made by students, and in data sufficiency this time, not in verbal, but in quant, is they jump too soon to the statements. People do this a lot of times. Okay, people do this a lot of times because they feel that they have to infuse the information in statement 1 and statement 2, and they do not analyze what is given to them first. Another big mistake that people do. Now, I'm not going to just tell you what are the mistakes. I'm going to help you understand why these mistakes will hurt you. And there's no better way of doing that rather than actually solving a question. Okay, so I'm showing you an official GMAT question. This is a sentence correction question in front of you. I'm giving you a couple of minutes to answer this question, and please answer this question. Take your time to answer this, and once you have answered this, you can actually post your responses in the poll. I'm just creating a poll for you guys. So Put your responses in the poll, and after you have solved this question, I will solve this question. I want you to notice the difference in the approach. Okay, so the poll is up. I'm gonna be muted for a couple of minutes. So all the best, guys. Make sure that you focus on this question and give your best to it. So I'll be muted for already a lot of time to you guys, more than anticipated, but just want to make sure that you guys give your best to this question. Okay, so last 20 seconds maybe now to answer this question. All right, so I'm gonna end the poll now. Okay, so great, guys. So I guess a good number of you solved this question, and probably you can already see the options which are most popular. Most of you went with option E. A good number of you went with option A, and a good number of you went with option C. B and D were not as popular, but again, my objective in this question, question, is not to solve the question. My objective over here is to help you understand how to solve the question and why shortcuts like splits won't work in most of the GMAT questions. Again, this is a 700 plus level question. Most likely, if I have to put it, I'll say this is a 750 level question on GMAT, which is a very tough question. Now let's understand the right approach. So earlier also, when I was a student, I used to focus on splits and identifying the grammar differences and all of that, but that never works on GMAT. Like the best approach that works on GMAT is the meaning-based approach. And I want to show that to you right now, and I want you to focus and see what is the difference that you find in my approach versus your approach. So let's read this sentence. A substance derived from the Madagascar periwinkle. Now, when I see derived from a Madagascar periwinkle, I'll ask myself, what is the role of derived in the sentence? Is it acting as a verb or a ed verbal? So basically, this is the first checkpoint that I will have in my mind, whether it is a verb or a ed verbal. There are two tests to do that. Test one is check if there is a helping verb before it. So if I look at helping verbs are like is, am, was, all of that. So there is no helping verb before derived. So if there is no helping verb, I have to move to test 2, because if there was a helping verb, I can be 100% sure that derived is acting as a verb. But since there is no helping verb, I have to go to step 2, which tells me ask whether the substance is the subject of the action or not. Is the substance deriving itself? Clearly not. The substance is derived from a Madagascar periwinkle. So since the word substance is substance is not the subject of derived is just a ed verbal. It is basically a modifier in simple terms, and it is giving us additional information about the substance. Again, I'm explaining this to you guys because again, some people may not know this rule, but when I'm reading it myself, I'll probably not take as much time. All I have to do is understand derived is a modifier. It is giving me additional information about the subject, which is substance. Okay, I don't have a verb for the subject yet. Let's read further. Which has proved useful in decreasing mortality amongst young leukemia patients. Now, what has proved useful? What is this which referring to? Can you guys tell me? What is this which referring to? Is it referring to substance or is it referring to Madagascar periwinkle? Let me call it MP. Please tell me in the chat here. What is the which? What is the word which referring to? What is which referring to, guys? Substance or Madagascar periwinkle? Okay, Ashmi says it is the substance. Amna says it is the substance. Anshu says it is Madagascar periwinkle. Vidyadhar says substance. What about others? Shivani did not post her response. Pratik, Nitin, Rohan, Abhi, Sonal. All of you go for substance. Okay, I have one for Anubhav. MP also. Anubhav says MP it is. Okay, guys. So honestly speaking, just like your answer, it is very ambiguous. In this case, it is not clear what is this which referring to, because this which, actually, if you look at grammatically, if you just go by grammar, it is placed close to MP. So it should ideally refer to MP grammatically, if I say, because it is placed next to this, and it makes sense with that also to an extent. I could say that a substance derived from Madagascar periwinkle, and this Madagascar periwinkle has proved useful in decreasing mortality. But if I go through the logical understanding, okay, if I go through the logical understanding, and as Pratik has put it rightly, it should actually refer to the substance. Logically, it should refer to the substance because it makes sense to say that a substance derived from Madagascar periwinkle has proved useful in decreasing mortality. Again, I'm not saying that it is 100%. I can be 100% sure about that because which can make sense with both Madagascar periwinkle as well as the substance. But in this case, that clarity is missing. So there is an ambiguity which is definitely there in this case. So I'm not sure what is which referring to. I'm inclined towards substance as most of you were because it seems to be logically that way around, but I cannot be sure because of the sentence construction. So I need a choice which clears this for me, okay? But what I know is that the substance has proved useful in decreasing mortality among young leukemia patients. So the sentence is about a substance which is derived from something called MP. I don't know what MP is, but the substance has proved useful in deriving mortality. That is kind of the meaning which I can sense out of it. Is cultivated. Okay, now what is cultivated referring to? If you have to look at it again, think of it this way. This was a subject. This is a modifier. This is not a verb form. This is another subject and verb pair, which has proved. So I still don't have a verb for the subject, the main subject, which is substance. And this is the verb for the subject. Okay. So what the sentence tells me is that a substance is cultivated in China. This substance is cultivated in China as part of a program. Which program? To integrate traditional herbal medicine into contemporary style of healthcare. So this substance is cultivated in China as part of a program which aims at integrating traditional herbal medicine into contemporary system of healthcare. Now, tell me guys, what is cultivated in China? Again, I know that the subject and verb pair is substance and is cultivated. So you might say that it is the substance, but think about it logically. Logically, what is cultivated in China? Is it the substance or is it MP? And if you think it is the substance, why do you think it is the substance? Or if you think it is MP, why do you think it is MP? Tell me guys. What do you think is cultivated in China? Okay, logically MP. Why logically MP, Abhi? Why do you think it should be MP? Okay, both can be. Sudeep says it can be both. Okay. Amna says, oh, MP because substance has to be derived. Okay, MP is a plant. How do you know that, Sonal? Ruhi says MP is cultivated. How do I know MP is cultivated? See guys, try and understand it logically. I can never cultivate a substance. A substance can never be cultivated. Think of it like this. You have to understand that grammatically, it is the substance that is cultivated. That is the grammatical meaning which the sentence is trying to communicate. But that is incorrect. I cannot say that a substance is cultivated. Right? Just like I can't say that a tree is walking. Similarly, I cannot say that substance is cultivated. It is illogical to say that. So that is illogical. Now, how do I know MP is cultivated? Some of you say that, okay, like some people are saying that MP is a plant, but how do I know MP is a plant? Like, how am I supposed to know? Do I need external knowledge for it? Probably not. If you try and contextualize the sentence better, you can actually understand that it is a Madagascar periwinkle, which is a plant, and it should be cultivated. And let me tell you how you can understand that. Think of the sentence closely. A substance is cultivated in China as part of a program to integrate traditional herbal medicine. Focus on this part, to integrate traditional herbal medicine. So we are definitely talking about something which is about a herb or a shrub or whatever, a plant basically. This something is supposed to be cultivated to integrate herbal medicine into contemporary style of healthcare. Now, what medicine are we talking about? What herb are we talking about? The only herb possible in the entire sentence is this, Madagascar periwinkle. So it's pretty much clear that the sentence is talking about the cultivation of Madagascar periwinkle. It cannot be anything else at all. Okay, so what the sentence wanted to communicate, if I have to put in simplest form terms for you, is the intended meaning was that the Madagascar periwinkle, which is most likely a plant, is cultivated in China as part of a certain program. Now, why is it cultivated? Let's talk about that. A substance is derived from Madagascar periwinkle, and this substance is useful in decreasing mortality among leukemia patients. And this is why this plant is cultivated in China, and the aim of doing so is to integrate herbal medicine into contemporary style of healthcare. Okay, now let me ask you guys a question. Now this is going to be very, very interesting question, and I want all of you to be very honest with me when you're answering this. How many of you thought about the meaning of the sentence in exactly this way? How many of you understood that Madagascar periwinkle is supposed to be cultivated, not the substance, because of this logical understanding? Please tell me a yes or no in this poll. And I'm asking this when you were solving this question yourself, not when I started discussing it. How many of you thought about the meaning yourself when you're solving this question exactly like this? How many of you came to the realization that a substance cannot be cultivated? It should be the Madagascar periwinkle, which is a plant, and it should be cultivated. How many of you did that? Okay. Let's see a few more votes. I see still people are voting. And please be very honest and direct with me over here. I'll be happy to see your responses. All right. Okay, I'm ending the poll now. I see votes are more or less stabilized. So about 30% of you did that. I'm really glad to see that. I'm really happy, to be honest with you guys, that you were able to see this. 70% of you say that I did not think of it in this manner when I was solving this question. Now, guys, trust me, this question was solved by me after a lot of time after taking the GMAT. In fact, when I solved this question, probably in the entire year preceding to it, I did not solve any SC question. So I was that out of touch when I solved this question. Obviously, when I was preparing myself and I take the GMAT, I was following the meaning-based approach, and I actually got a 94 percentile in GMAT sentence correction. Okay, I scored a 94 percentile. So you can understand what was the skill level of me as a student at that point. But when I solved this question, at that point, I would say I was not as much in touch with meaning-based approach. I got this question wrong in the first attempt because I was not focusing on the meaning. Okay, I was not focusing on the meaning at that point of time. And that's where I even struggled. Someone with a 94 percentile in SC also struggled. What I'm trying to say here is, unless you think about the meaning of sentences, you cannot get 700 level questions right on GMAT. So it's very important that you actually focus on the approach always. Okay, so that is very, very important, guys. Anubhav has a question. Anubhav, what you are doing is, again, focusing a lot more on just this particular question and learning from it. My objective is a little broader, but I'll still answer your question. What you're trying to do is put a comma between a substance and derived, and then you are asking whether which will refer to substance in that case or not. That comma is not going to make a lot of difference. Which is still going to be ambiguous in that case. Okay, because I need a clear-cut antecedent of overall for that which. Okay, which is not happening here in the sentence. Okay, so Anurag, again, Anurag has a question. Anurag says, students who are working hard, are also working, find it very difficult to prepare for this exam. So what is the best method or ways that you should apply to prepare well? What should be a routine and how to maintain it? So Anurag, that's a very different question to what we were talking about right now. So I'm going to take this question towards the end for you also. But for the time being, I'm going to give you a link, Anurag, to basically create a study plan if you want. I guess you are GMAT-Viz student, so you already have access to the study plan which is created by GMAT-Viz. You already just need to follow that study routine. And if you have any other questions on it, don't worry about it. We'll take it up towards the end of the webinar because right now I need to move forward with this. Okay, so let's continue this and I'll take up your question in the Q&A part. So these are the option choices that we had. And honestly speaking, 36% of people, like again, this is data derived from GMAT club attempts from most of the people. So 36% people end up marking C as the correct answer. The correct answer is E, Megha, in this case. 36% people still end up marking C as the correct answer because that takes care of the error with which is only the grammatical error which people spot, but it doesn't take care of the error which is there with the subject. Okay, so it is very important that you understand the right approach. So A is incorrect. We already discussed about it. B is also incorrect because it talks about a derivative is cultivated. It still says a derivative is cultivated. So B is again incorrect. Not many of you marked it. Again, C is also incorrect because it also says a derivative is cultivated. Okay, it is not the derivative which is cultivated. It is the Madagascar periwinkle that is cultivated. C takes care of the error with which it tells us that it is the derivative which has proved useful, but it doesn't take care of the second error. T, on the other hand, takes care of both the errors. It tells us that it is the Madagascar periwinkle, which is cultivated in China, and it tells us a derivative of which has proved useful. So both the errors are taken care of by choice E. Okay. I have one more question from Suraj. Suraj says, I try to follow the meaning-based process. The problem I face is to keep track of meaning as well as breaking sentences into verbals, relative pronouns, etc. One of these things gets missed. So Suraj, again, you're thinking of those two as two separate entities. But trust me, understanding the meaning is all about breaking the sentences. Breaking the sentence into verbals and relative pronouns help you get the meaning clear. Okay, that is a tool to understand the meaning. Otherwise, you cannot understand the meaning of the sentence. Whenever you're breaking stuff, why are you breaking it? You're breaking it to understand the role played by that entity in the bigger picture. So always ask that question to yourself, that what is the role of this entity in the bigger picture? And that will help you understand the meaning better. And again, if you're a GMAT student, you will have detailed solutions written for every single SC question which you solve in the course. So what you do is, after the question is solved, you go back to the solution, you check your understanding line by line. You will see that we are also breaking the sentence in that verbal, in that relative pronoun exactly. So what you need to check is, okay, when I broke it at this point, what is the understanding that I generated out of it? And then you refer that understanding with the solution. In the solution, it will be clearly written that from this part, what is the understanding that you should generate? If you tally both the things, you'll be able to understand why are you missing the meaning. Because probably you're not doing that analysis. You're just thinking about, again, this is from my experience till now with students that I've seen doing this mistake, that what they do is they break at relative pronoun or they break at a verbal and they tell themselves, okay, this is a verbal, this is a relative pronoun. But they don't go to the next step. What the next step is, understand what is that verbal referring to? What is the role played by that verbal and whether it is logical or not? Similarly, if it's a relative pronoun that you're stopping at, understand what is that relative pronoun referring to? Is that logical or not? So there are certain rules around it that you have to question at that point of time. I hope that answers your question, Suraj. Okay. So now, why do people focus on the shortcuts? Why do we not spend that much time in understanding the question better or the meaning of the sentence better? The biggest problem with the thing is that we start to think that in order to solve or get the questions right, we have to save time. Okay, we have to save time on reading the question, because that's when we will be able to analyze the option choices better, because that's our thought process. We think that giving more time to options is what's going to save us. But what we do in that case is we end up reading the question stem too quickly, which basically leads to only a rough understanding of what's being stated. When that happens, you're able to eliminate 2 or 3 choices confidently. That is easy. But the biggest problem arises because you get stuck with the last 2-3 choices which are close enough. And this will happen more for 700 level questions than any other question level. Okay. And when you get stuck with 2 close choices, what is that we do? We will always reread the question or choice multiple times. And that ends up in generally you guessing something. You mark some answer, one of the answers, because time is running out. Okay. So it is very, very important that you do not fall for this. And if you look at the entire process over here, what we did was by achieving this process, by going through this process, what people achieve is they're able to save time in reading the question. They are able to save time by doing that. They only spend 20-30 seconds on the question stem, and the time saving happens there. But the moment they get stuck in 2 or 3 close choices, they have to reread, and that ends up consuming 1 to 1.5 minutes. And the biggest problem with the entire thing is your timing is way off, and your accuracy is still not great. You're still not confident when you're marking the answer. And the only reason why all of this happened was you were reading the question stem too quickly. That was the only reason why all of this happened. So you have to ensure that you're not falling prey to this. You're not reading the question stem too quickly. You need to give the question its due time to understand the question stem. That's very, very critical, guys. Make sure that you don't fall for this at all. Okay. So this is very important. Now I have another question from Anubhav. Anubhav says, can you give us one question of such level so that we can try applying this approach that we just learned? So Anubhav, again, as I said, this webinar is not about reading sentence correction. So I'm not going to focus on that part, but we do have a lot of webinars on sentence correction. In fact, this is a webinar series that we were running from the last 10 weeks. I'm just giving you the link to access those webinar recordings for all the webinars which were conducted in this webinar series. You can use this link to actually go through the sentence correction webinar recording. There we have covered a lot of questions around the same approach, using the same approach. So that will help you build that approach, okay? So this should be helpful. And you can also check out a free trial of GMAT-Viz that will also get you access to some lessons around other topics also. So in case you want to do that, you can click on this link, which I'm also gonna share in the chat here. So it's there in the pinned on the chat. You can use that link to sign up for a free trial also. Okay, guys, so going ahead with this. So basically the reason why all this happened was because we read the question stem too quickly. And there could be two reasons behind it, why people end up doing that. One reason is people don't know the right approach. So some of you were exposed to the approach for the first time, probably. Some of you knew it, but were not using it. So it could be because of the wrong approach. It could also be because of you're worried about timing. And if you're worried about timing, I told you earlier also that the first 10 questions or 15 questions are going to matter more. And not just that, guys, you have to understand that using the right approach or the meaning-based approach is not going to consume extra time. It is going to consume you the right amount of time, which you should be consuming in order to get the question right. Okay, it will consume you only that right amount of time. Trust me, I scored a 94 percentile, as I said, on SC, and my average time for each SC question was 1 minute 15 seconds only. Okay, I only spent 1 minute 15 seconds per question. I'm talking about actual GMAT, and I was using the meaning-based approach throughout. Okay? Which brings me to the third myth: practice makes a man perfect. This is one of the biggest problem that I encounter from students every day. They tell me that, okay, I have been practicing questions, and this is something which is true for retakers, new test takers also. Retakers tell me I have been practicing questions. I have solved 2000 questions. I have solved OG, advanced OG, GMAT Club, Manhattan, this and that. I'm still not there. So that's an inflection point, guys. You need to understand why are you not there if you are actually struggling after solving that many questions. There's something wrong with how you're solving questions. After that also, if you're asking that, okay, where do I get more questions from? That's not something which is going to help you. Then again, I interact with many people who are first-time test takers, and they ask me, okay, how many questions should I solve? I've got this list of 700 questions or 1000 questions. I think this will serve the purpose. I think just solving the OG is going to serve the purpose. Again, nothing against these students. Obviously, when I was a student, I made the same mistake myself. As I said, I solved 2000 questions in my very first half of my prep and I was nowhere. So the biggest myth I would say is probably practice makes a man perfect. And as I said, most people generally focus on practicing questions and taking marks. But what you have to understand is you don't learn from the questions. You actually learn from the solutions. That's something which is very important. Now, let me ask you guys, how do you guys analyze the solutions that you analyze? Let's say you have solved a question, okay, or you have solved 10 questions or whatever. What is the process that you guys follow to analyze the solutions? Let me hear from you first. Then I'll tell you what most people do. And please be honest, and I want it to be a two-way communication throughout. So do tell me what is the approach that you follow in order to understand the solutions or review the solutions. In which scenario do you review it? How do you review it? Tell me that. Okay, I'm waiting for responses from your side. Okay, I guess some of you are typing it. Okay. Ashwini says, when I make mistakes, I go back and read. Okay, common thing. When you make mistakes, then you refer to it, right? Okay, what about others? Okay, Amna says, review mostly when I get it wrong. Pratik says, meaning of the sentence, is it making sense? Grammar errors. Julia says, I'm eliminating the clearly wrong ones straight away. Okay. Deepika says, check the solution and discussion on GMAT Club. But how do you check the solution? What part of the solution do you check? Vidyadhar says, I retry on my own, understand the explanations first. Manula says, theory, then I practice and then I review what I did wrong. Break sentence, analyze meaning, go for mistakes. Sudeep, that's great, Sudeep. Again, you just talked about the sentence correction, but I can kind of guess what you're doing for the other ones also. That's good. But trust me, guys, what is the most common thing that people do? And I have done that as well as a student. People only review the solutions when they get the questions wrong. They assume that if they have gotten it right, they would have gotten it right for the right reason. Or they assume that there is nothing more to learn from that question, which is a very wrong thought in my opinion. You should always, always, always analyze the answer choices, or not just answer choices, the solutions in its entirety for every question that you have solving. As a rule of thumb, I tell my students that if you're taking 2 minutes to answer the question, you should be spending at least 5 minutes to review the solution of that question. It is possible that you did it exactly the right way you're supposed to, but in that case, worst case, you'll end up wasting that 5 minutes. But if there is a significant learning, even in 1 out of the 3 or 4 questions that you're reviewing, it will actually help you get much more value out of the time that you're going to spend later on by struggling on it. Okay, so it is very important for you to review the solutions for every question. This is what most people don't do. And the worst part is, even when they're reviewing, they spend most of their time on option analysis. Trust me, for most people, solutions are actually nothing but option analysis, nothing else. Trust me. And this stems from the fact that because most of the resources out there, the solutions are all about options, nothing else. In fact, I as a student also, when I was solving the questions, in fact, this is something you will even see in official guide solutions in most of the cases. They will just tell you why is A incorrect, B incorrect, C incorrect, D incorrect, and E is correct. That's all. They don't give you any other part of the solution. That's all about it. Like when I was studying, even in RC passages, it was only about, okay, why is this answer choice wrong? Why is that answer choice wrong? But no one told me ever that, okay, what is the understanding that I'm supposed to generate from the passage itself? Okay, so for most of us, solutions is equal to option analysis, but that's not the case. See, you don't make a mistake because there's a wrong answer choice sitting over there. If I change that answer choice to something else, which is also incorrect, but if I want to trap you, I can trap you with that as well. You get something wrong, you get trapped with the wrong answer choice because of your poor understanding of the question, not the option choices. Okay, it's not the option choices where you made the error. It's because you did not understand the question right, or the passage right, or the para right. That's where you're making that error. So when you are doing the solution analysis, you're supposed to spend your time on the statement, the question statement itself. Match your line of reasoning with that. That is more important than anything else. So most people don't do this. And that's why you don't see improvement in your score even after solving tons of questions. And that's what we need to understand. So so again, let me go to the next slide actually. So how do you master the approach, or how do you analyze the solutions? The most important thing is that when you are referring to solutions, you should refer to solutions that follow a consistent and logical method. That is very, very critical. You guys need to ensure always that you are always referring to solutions which are following a consistently the same method should be followed, and the method should be logical. As I said, if you're following a solution which is using shortcuts and you're trying to learn a logical method by following solutions which are using shortcuts, you're not going to learn that. You have to follow solutions which are using meaning-based approach for SC or pre-thinking for CR, for example, and they're consistently using the same approach. So that is the first important step that you should have access to. If you don't have access to it, then again, reviewing the solutions is not going to help you as much. The second step, as I said, you have to verify the solution for every question, irrespective of whether you get it right or wrong. The second thing is, the third thing is that 80% of your time should be spent on reviewing the sentence, argument, or passage analysis. I'm going to give you an example of that as well. Don't worry about that. And when you are doing that, you note down the variances in your approach. That is very important. Try to understand the variance in your approach, which is the right approach, and then only you'll be able to see that improvement happening. So for example, I have a solution in front of me of a CR question. So the ones that you see in italics, this is the argument, basically, the CR argument that is there. Okay, and the one in normal text is the explanation that is there on our portal for this particular question. So how you're supposed to analyze this is that, okay, you need to ask yourself, okay, when I read this first line, again, these italicized lines were actually in one para. But what you need to do is ask yourself that, okay, when I read the first line only, did I analyze it and come to this understanding that total area is equal to of cultivated land is equal to total area of unexplored land? Did I come to this understanding or not? If you did not come to this understanding, you have already made a mistake. Even if you got the question right in this case, you might get it wrong sometime else. So you have to match your understanding like this. Then you have to see that, okay, when I read the second sentence, did I combine both pieces of information and come to this inference that there is a lot more cultivable land on earth than current estimate indicate? You have to ask yourself this way. So what I'm trying to say here is, as you are reading, you should be able to contextualize things properly. And you have to match your understanding of the context with the solution, with the context provided in the solution. Trust me, guys, if your understanding of the context matches with what is there in the solution, you'll most likely get the question right. If you start building this habit, you will not face inconsistencies in your score. You'll start seeing consistency in your performance all the time. Okay. Now, even before you actually start doing this, obviously, when I'm saying that you have to match your solution, what you also have to do before this is you have to build this understanding of the right method. You have to understand what is the right method. And how do you do that? There are 3 learning stages for every topic. So whenever you're learning something new, for example, let's say you are learning the concept of verb tenses. So first thing that you have to do is understand what verb tenses are. What are the rules, what are the formulas or the concepts that are there? And most people do this. But most people skip the second step, that after learning what the verb tenses rules are, they need to understand how to apply the concepts of verb tenses using the meaning-based approach or the methodical approach that I'm talking about. Okay, so how do you apply the understanding of verb tenses using meaning? That is what you need to learn after this, because unless you learn that, you will not be able to apply it on questions. And only after that you should be practicing questions on that topic. And if you do that, you can get to a 700+ score easily. Okay? Now, what are the right methods? The right method for SC is meaning, CR is pre-thinking, RC is involved and evolved reading, data sufficiency, drawing inferences, and for PS you should follow a 3-step process. Again, there are multiple webinars that we have conducted in the past on individual areas. Tomorrow I am conducting another webinar on quant, which is around some of the most common mistakes that people make in quant. So you can attend that webinar as well. But those webinars which you have missed, like for example, we have done a lot of webinars on SC and CR already. You can actually go through the recordings using the link which I shared earlier. Okay, so you have to learn the right method to do this. Now, in order to teach you the right method, in our GMAT Viz course, we have come up with this idea of concept booster. So those of you who are GMAT Viz students, this is very important that when you are going through the course, you ensure that you're using the concept boosters the right way. What happened in the concept boosters is that you are given only one question to solve at once. And after that question, you have a very, very detailed solution using a consistent methodology. So what you're supposed to do is analyze the solutions properly and figure out your gaps in the application overall. And the reason why I'm focusing a lot on concept booster is each question is handpicked on concept boosters and it covers a different aspect from that particular topic. So we have done extensive research to cover all varieties of questions that come on GMAT on a particular topic. And there is at least one question of each variety in the concept booster. So I want you guys to focus on the concept boosters a lot, because this is gonna be the most critical part of the entire course offering that we have. If you focus on that, learn from the concept boosters, trust me, you will never ever find yourself stuck in any particular question overall, because that's the most important thing which will help you understand the right approach. Okay, guys, so that is something which is important. With that, let's move on to the next thought process, the next myth. Many people think that they should work on SC, CR, and RC parallelly. Okay, now, how many of you think this way? Let me ask you guys, how many of you think this way? That you should work on SC, CR, and RC parallelly. You should learn SC, CR, and RC parallelly. Let me rather ask a poll over here. How many of you think that you should be doing SC, CR, and RC parallelly in the learning phase? Let me put it this way. In the learning phase, how many of you think this way? Let's see a quick yes, no over here. Okay, I see some votes are coming in still. Let's wait for them. All right, I see votes are more or less stabilized now. Okay, so I see 45% of you think that way. 55% of you think you should not do that. So again, as I said, this is a very common misconception and a very big mistake that people do. Let me help you guys understand why it is wrong to do this. First, you need to understand what are the skills tested on GMAT verbal. Basically, there are three skills which are tested on GMAT verbal. Okay, the first skill is comprehension. What do I mean by comprehension? Comprehension means clearly understanding, and focus on the word clearly understanding what is being stated. It doesn't mean that you have to understand 70% of what is being stated or 80% of what is being stated. You should have a clear-cut idea of what is written. That is what comprehension means. Second skill is analytical reasoning. What it means is, given multiple pieces of information to you, can you understand the connection between them? Can you understand the flow between them? Can you rationalize the gaps? Can you identify the assumptions? That's what analytical reasoning means. Third skill is focus on main point. What does focus on main point mean? Focus on main point means that if you have multiple pieces of information, can you focus on the most important point or the main point, why someone has written that piece of information? Can you understand the intent behind something being written? Now, these are the three skills which are tested along with the grammar concepts, obviously, but these are three main skills which are tested on GMAT. Now, if I map the individual sections of GMAT verbal to these three skills, this is how the mapping goes. If you look at sentence correction, for example, you only have one sentence in sentence correction. So obviously there's no point of analytical reasoning. You do not have to understand the flow of information or the gap because there's just one sentence over there. And there's no need to focus on the main point because there's just one sentence over there. So the only skill which is tested in SC is comprehension. On the other hand, in CR, you don't just have to understand individual sentences. You also have to understand the gap or the flow of the information over there. So that CR requires you to be good at two things. And on the other hand, RC requires you to be good at all three of them. You have to build the skill of comprehension, you have to build the skill of analytical reasoning, and then you have to build the skill of focusing on main point. Now, think for a moment that if you start working with RC, okay, then you have to build all three skills at the same time. Or even if you're working on SC, CR, and RC parallelly, when the time that you're investing on CR and RC will not give you the best possible outcome if your comprehension skills are poor, because comprehension skills form a basis of all three of them. So the time that you would be investing on CR and RC will not give you that outcome. Rather than that, what you should be doing is invest the time on SC first. Build a skill level where you're comfortable about the comprehension of any sentence at that particular point of time. So that's why I say that the best sequence of studying for anyone who is starting their prep, again, I know a lot of you would be in the initial phases right now. It's very important that you follow SC first, then do CR, and then do RC. You should follow this because if you're doing this, then you're only working on one skill at a time. The moment you work on improve your skill in SC of comprehension, when you move to CR, you're just focusing on analytical reasoning because comprehension is already in place. Then when you move to RC, you just focus on main point because analytical reasoning is already in place. Okay, so that's how you go about the sequence. Now, if you have already prepared for some time, if you're someone who has already done some bit of prep, then the sequence should slightly be different. What you should do is you should take a module-wise test for each area, as in for SC, CR, and RC. You should take about 30 questions each. Again, this can be done from Quizard, which is there on our platform. So basically, you do this quizzes and identify your strong and weak areas. Strong areas are which ones where your score is more than 70%. Weak areas are ones where your score is less than 70%. So let's take an example. Let's say that the student took a module-wise test and this is the score that the student got. 90 in SC, 60 in CR, 40 in RC. So clearly CR and RC are in the weak areas. So the student definitely needs to do CR and RC first and SC should be done later on. Okay, but the ideal order should not be RC then CR. The ideal order should be CR then RC then SC. you should not start with the poorest section necessarily. You should start working on your weak areas. Can anyone tell me why am I recommending to start with CR instead of RC, even though the student has a 60% accuracy in CR, which is better than RC? Can you guys tell me in the comments here, in the chat over here? Let's see some responses from you. Let's see some responses. Why do you think I'm recommending CR first and then RC, even though the student is better at CR than RC? Okay, Manuela has a response. She says, because studying RCR, you can improve RC. Good. CR is still weak, which needs to be improved. Okay. But why before RC? CR is only 2 of the core skills compared to RC, which is all 3. Great point. Skill in CR helps in RC. Good point, Abhi. That's the reason. Basically, if the student is weak in CR, it's possible because of poor understanding of analytical reasoning or poor analytical reasoning skills. And if the analytical reasoning is weak, then it would be impacting in RC also. So if he works first on analytical reasoning, that will help him get to the next level. So always remember, in your weak areas also, you should follow this pattern, SC, CR, then RC as closely as possible, depending on whichever topics are on your weak area. So over here, I know that the student's comprehension skills are taken care of. I'm pretty sure that he comprehends things better, because that's why you see the score of SC at 90%. Okay, so I need to work on analytical reasoning and focus on main point in that order. Okay, now one more myth which people have, and one of the most common, again, one of the most common myths, not as common as the earlier ones, but many people think that skipping some topics is fine on GMAT. Not really, guys. If you look at these two students on your screen, again, I'm giving you the ESR snapshots of 2 students once again. On the student on the left has made 5 mistakes. The student on the right has made 6 mistakes. Okay, you look at the number of mistakes yourself. 1, 2, 3 mistakes over here, 0 mistakes here. 2 mistakes, 1 mistakes, 1 mistake. You look at the quant scores of these 2 students. What do you understand from this? What do you understand from this ESR, guys? Any inference that you can make? Again, I'll share my inferences, but I want to see what are the inferences that you are able to make from it. Waiting for your thoughts on this. What are the inferences that you can make, guys? Okay. Anubhav says first 10 questions are very vital. Need to get high accuracy on first 10 questions. Ansu says, good point, guys. That's something which I've definitely covered. That's one of the biggest inferences that you can make. Another inference that you have to understand and make is that, again, look at this guy. He's not making any mistakes whatsoever, many mistakes whatsoever in the last few questions. And you have a good score also. Again, he has gotten a 49, which is a pretty good score. So that tells us that obviously the difficulty level of the overall questions that he also received was pretty high. So it's not like he's not good at answering questions. He's also good at answering questions. One reason why he could have made these 2 mistakes, again, there could be possible reasons. One is, you can say, silly mistakes. Another possible reason is these 2 questions were from his weak areas. Okay, I don't know that. Right? So basically, what happens is, if you have any question from a weak area in the first 10, you might make mistakes on them. Now, you can tell me that, okay, Piyush, I don't have control over what comes on the GMAT in my first quarter. That's precisely my point. If something which is coming is not under your control, you have to ensure that you get easy and medium questions right from all areas, including your weak ones. Now, why am I talking about it? I am talking about this because I've seen many students not covering topics like permutation and probability at all. I've seen students not working on boldface at all. I've seen students ignore these topics. I've seen students ignore evaluate as a question type. That, okay, I won't do this. Again, boldface generally doesn't come in the first quarter. I know that. But I've seen people doing this across various topics. It happens many times. So, and why this is critical? Because see, many people have this habit of, again, a lot of people I talk to are from India. At least in India, I know most of the tests that we take in school, they give us options to pick 5 out of 7 questions which are there. So that's when what I used to strategically do was, when I used to prepare even for the test, I used to prepare for 70 to 80% of the topics really well, instead of focusing my attention on all of them. So what I used to do was, I used to prepare in such depth about those topics that I can answer anything from there. That was my strategy. But that doesn't work on GMAT. And that is the strategy of many people also, that they will just do a few things and they will do it well. But on GMAT, that will not work out for you. Okay, guys? So it's very important that you don't skip those topics. So these were some of the common mistakes which I hear students making. And as I said, I'll quickly wrap up this mistakes part of the session, so that we are opening it up for an open-ended Q&A. I'm here with you guys for another 10-15 minutes. You guys can ask me any question around your prep that you guys have, which is troubling you. I'm more than happy to answer them. You can reach out to me also on the following details: piyush@gmatviz.com, and the phone number which is provided, it's there on WhatsApp. You can reach out to me on that as well. And in case you're looking for a personalized study plan, free of charge, we have an AI-driven engine, as I said, which gives you access to that personalized study plan free of charge. You can create a study plan using the link which I just provided. Okay, so feel free to ask me any questions that you might have around your prep. I'll be more than happy to take them up now and answer them for you. Okay, and one more announcement. We are running a month-end sale on our website right now. On special request, we have extended the sale till Sunday because Easter was there. So this sale is live till 4th of April, which is tomorrow, in which you can actually get a massive discount of 57% and get access to our complete package for $219 only. So I would strongly recommend, if anyone of you who is looking at considering a package or a course for preparing for the GMAT, you can look at GMAT.Viz for sure. Okay, so I have a few questions. Anubhav is asking, what should be the ideal time of reading or comprehension? So Anubhav, again, if you ask me ideal time, as in the last phase of when you are taking the GMAT, at that point of time, for an easy passage should be about 2.5 to 3 minutes. For a medium passage, somewhere between 3 to 4 minutes. For a hard passage, it should be about 4.5 to 5 minutes. Just reading a comprehension. I'm not talking about answering the questions. But if you like to come to this timing using the right approach, which I talked about, involved and involved reading, initially when you start doing involved and involved reading, you will be taking twice this time. And as you do more of contextualizing and involved reading, it will actually reduce to this much. Okay, I have another question by Swani. For those studying by themselves, what resources would you suggest to enhance the score to 700, 800, to enhance score or practice 700, 800 level questions only? Thanks for this session, was really insightful. So Shivani, again, see, the entire thing which I talked about was just practicing 700 to 800 level questions does not serve the purpose. What you need to understand is, in order to enhance your scores, you need to learn the right methods first. You need to understand the right methods, and then you need to solve questions which give you a solution using the right methods in place. Okay. Now, the methods I have already talked about. You have seen those methods earlier. I've shared the link of our webinar recordings also a little while earlier. So you can use that webinar recording link to go through the webinars that we have conducted to understand those methods. Then when you're solving the questions, what you need to do is you need to find solutions which are written in that approach itself. Now, if you're just studying by yourself, again, I'm not sure how you will get those solutions, because you'll have to refer to something, obviously. Most of the books out there, even if you get hold of them free of charge, generally are made, at least for verbal, are made for native speakers of the language. And I'm assuming that you are not a non-native speaker. So if you're a non-native speaker, those books will not be giving the solutions in the way that you are probably expecting it to. So in that case, probably GMAT Club is the only option that you have, where you can see solutions by multiple people, and you have to figure out which one is using the approach that you are supposed to apply. Anshul has a question. He says, can you please tell me how many questions are there in each quarter for verbal and or con? See, Anshul, ESR just gives us data about the scored questions. So in this quant, there are 7,777 questions which are scored basically in each quarter out of the total 31 questions which are there. So 3 questions are unscored. We don't know where they lie. I don't know whether it is in the first quarter, second quarter, third quarter, or last quarter. But I only know that out of the scored questions, this is how the distribution is. In verbal, it is 8,778. Okay. Let's look at the question. Okay, I'm going first come first serve basis. So Ringa has a question again. I'm not sure how to pronounce the first name, so I'm very sorry. I'm just taking your second name. Once you have gone through all the stages of learning, how often should you take mock test exams? Very good question, Ringa. So honestly speaking, how often you should take mocks depends on how you're performing in each mock. In my opinion, ideally, you should be taking one mock every 3 to 4 days in the last 20 days of your prep, last 20 days of your prep. So about 4 to 5 mocks is enough, provided there is a big if, let me put it if and only if, you are getting close to your target score in the mocks. So let's say your target score is 740. If you are getting 720s, 730s, then you can take a mock in 3 or 4 days, that is fine. But if your target score is 740 and in one mock you got a 650 or even a 690, for example, it's a very bit decent score, but still there's a 50-point difference between your target score and your current score. Then you should not take another mock in 3 or 4 days. Then probably what you should do is you should take out 1 week or 2 weeks, or depending on whatever week schedule that you have, and work on your weak areas. That is very important. Understand why are you having those weaknesses that are there and work on your weak areas. So there's a right or wrong answer to it. It actually depends on your current scenario. In fact, if you would like to discuss your like current scores with me or anything like that, you can also connect with me on a call. Let me find the link to schedule a call. Okay, yeah. So here it is. We can use this link to schedule a call with me to discuss about it, but ideally it should be dependent on how you're performing. Okay, Atul has another question. He says, how do the experimental questions play a part in GMAT adaptive algorithms? So again, Atul, very difficult for us to answer that because GMAT doesn't reveal any data on it. So it ideally is not supposed to impact your scores. It is just, experimental questions are just for the GMAT to understand what is the difficulty level of the question. So we cannot really say what is the exact impact, but it seems like it should not impact your score at all. Okay, Suraj has a question. He says, considering I'm preparing for a while, what if SC is weak, CR and RC are strong? So if CR and RC are strong and SC is weak, then you need to work on SC completely. It's more about that maybe the understanding of the grammar rules or even the comprehension is hitting you hard. So if you're an avid reader, it is possible that you could be better, good at CR and RC, but not SC. So probably you need to give a little more attention to the meaning part and the grammar rules. Okay, Gaurav has a question. How much time will it take from the starting point from basics to go from verbal 30 to verbal 45 while working full time? So again, verbal 32 to verbal 45, Gaurav, verbal 45 is a very high score, by the way. 32 to 40 can be reached with about 90 hours of straight effort in the right direction. But if you're looking at 45, that would at least require you to put in about 170, 180 hours of effort, because 45 is a very, very high score. You have to be perfect in all of them. Okay, so Shivani says, thank you. We'll check out the videos on GMATFest. Sure, Shivani, please do that. We have a good, pretty good free trial. And if you make the decision, obviously you can avail the discount also. Okay, I have one question from Edibo Wale. At what stage can I start solving OGs? So again, I think you are also a GMATFest student. If you are a GMATFest student, you will actually get a list of OG questions that you should solve at relevant points. So just refer to that list and solve those OG questions. In general, for sentence correction, ideally, it's even okay to solve like the entire sentence correction question bank from OG after you're done with the entire SC part of the course. That is also fine. You can do it in stages or you can do it at the end. For CR, you should ideally do it along with the course as the course is recommending. RC should be done at the end. And quant, again, if you don't, I am assuming you're a GMATFest student, so you'll get that PDF. That will make your life easy. Because in quant, there are multiple topics which are tested in a question. So what we have done from our side is we have tried to segregate those right topics in the right places. So that way, once you complete a topic from the course, let's say you have completed prime numbers from the course, then you will get a list of which questions on GMAT is testing you only till prime numbers. So that way you can just do that. If you don't have access to the GMAT viz list, then you have to do quant only after working on quant completely. Okay, Pooja has a question. Is it advisable to take the test at the test center? Honestly speaking, Pooja, from 8th April onwards, there's not much of a difference between an online versus a test center format. So it's up to your convenience what you want to do. If you're comfortable taking it from your home and have a good internet connection, I would prefer taking it from the home. Ashwini has a question. How do we maintain consistency? Sometimes I have a week of no studying. What would you suggest? So Ashwini, again, that's a very big problem, to be honest, to take care of, and it's a very difficult question for me to answer. What I personally did in my case was I told my boss, and when I was studying, and I told my family also about my commitment around GMAT. Again, my boss, your boss may not be as open as my boss was, so you don't need to tell them exactly what your commitment for GMAT is, but what you need to do is put a simple schedule for yourself that, okay, in this time frame, every single day, I'm definitely gonna be studying. This is the time frame which I'm gonna be studying. And you have to force yourself to sit and study in that time frame. And what I've seen is that there's a 21-day rule that if you do something continuously for 21 days, it is gonna be very, very easy for you to do that. Okay. So it is very important that you focus on sitting for a particular time slot consistently and force yourself to do this for 24 days, 21 days. And then after that, it becomes easy for you to follow that schedule. Okay. I hope that answers your question, Ashwini. And there was one more question by Anurag, I guess, earlier, that how do I, as a working profession, how do I maintain a routine? So again, Anurag, probably this also answers your question in a way. So try to get that slot out overall. Okay. Fine. I don't see any other query as of now. I'll wait for a couple more minutes. Okay. You're welcome, Ashwini. I'm happy to know that I was able to help. All right, guys. So I don't see any other query in the chat. So it was great interacting with you. I hope this webinar was helpful for all of you. I get a yes from Anurag as well, so he's also clear with it. So great, guys. All the best for your prep. We have another webinar tomorrow, which ideally Shakib was supposed to conduct, but Shakib sadly has contracted COVID, so he'll not be available tomorrow. So I'll be taking up that session tomorrow. That session is gonna be on quant. It's gonna be a subject matter related session where we're gonna discuss about the most common mistakes which people make in quant overall. Okay. So great, guys. So Sufi, if you have my WhatsApp, you can ping me on my WhatsApp number. I'm just sending you another number right now. I can have a chat on this number. Just ping me on this number. Okay. Thank you so much, guys. It was great interacting with you. All the best for your prep.